Hello, my name is Elaine. I'm 61 years old, and last winter, I was kicked out of my daughter's home with nothing but two suitcases and a plastic bag of vitamins. It was snowing. The wind cut through my coat like I wasn't even wearing one. And as the front door closed behind me, I realized something I never thought I'd have to say out loud. My own child didn't see me as her mother anymore. She saw me as an inconvenience, a burden, an extra mouth to feed. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask her why. I just left. That night, I sat on a freezing bus bench outside a gas station with no clue where to go. My phone was dead. My hands were shaking. And in that moment, I told myself, you are invisible now. You are no longer needed, no longer loved, no longer anyone's priority. But I didn't know. Life was about to hand me a secret that would unravel every lie I'd been told. And when I uncovered it, I didn't just get back on my feet, I turned the entire world upside down and made sure the people who tossed me aside would feel the weight of what they did. If you're still listening, trust me, this isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about silence, about how quiet can be the loudest weapon in the world. I wasn't always someone who held power. For most of my life, I was just dependable. I raised my daughter, Sophie, mostly alone after my husband passed. I cooked, cleaned, saved every penny, never asked for much. And when Sophie got married to a man named Tyler, a man who always looked at me like I was a dust speck on his perfect kitchen counter, I bit my tongue for her sake. When my health got shaky and I sold the house I'd lived in for decades, she offered, or maybe just tolerated, the idea of me moving in for a while. Said it was only until I found something more stable, but I didn't know stable meant not being seen, not being spoken to unless spoken at, not being allowed to touch the thermostat or watch my shows, or even keep my toothbrush in the main bathroom. Tyler never hid his distaste. Every sigh, every side-eye, every slammed cupboard was a message: you are not welcome here. And Sophie, well, she stopped meeting my eyes. She played peacemaker while I drowned in silence. Then came the dinner, the one where I made his favorite roasted chicken with rosemary potatoes. Sophie barely looked up from her phone. Tyler chewed loudly and said nothing for 10 minutes. Then, out of nowhere, he put down his fork and said, "You know, we're not a shelter. Maybe it's time she finds somewhere else to stay." Just like that. And Sophie, she said nothing. Not "don't talk to her like that." Not "she's my mother." Not even "we'll talk about it later." Just silence. It was in that silence I packed my life into 2 suitcases. It was in that silence I walked out the door. And it was in that silence I began to remember who I really was. Because sometimes, when you lose everything, the only thing left to find is the truth about who you are, who you've always been, and what you're truly capable of when no one is watching. I thought I was powerless. That night, shivering in a motel room that smelled like mildew and loneliness, I thought I was at my lowest. But buried in an old shoebox, wrapped in yellowing paper, was something I hadn't seen in decades. A letter. And that letter, well, it didn't just change the way I saw my daughter or her husband. It changed everything. So if you've ever been made to feel like a burden, if someone you love has made you question your worth, stay with me. Because this story, it starts with betrayal, but it doesn't end there. Not even close. When I first moved into Sophie and Tyler's townhouse, I told myself it would be temporary, just until I got back on my feet, just until I figured out what came next. They had a finished basement with its own bathroom. Nothing fancy, but it was quiet, private. I told myself I was lucky. Sophie even called it "a little sweet for you, Mom," like it was some kind of retirement gift. I ignored the fact that Tyler didn't help me carry my bags in, that he disappeared into the kitchen, muttering something about a work email, while I dragged 2 suitcases and a laundry basket down a narrow flight of stairs that smelled faintly of bleach and wet carpet. I told myself it was fine. That night, I lay awake on the futon, staring at the ceiling tiles, listening to the sound of them moving around upstairs, cabinets slamming, Sophie's laughter, muffled, Tyler's voice, louder. I felt like a guest in someone else's life. And still, I told myself it was fine. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee. I used the good beans I had brought from my old kitchen, my little luxury. I set out mugs, added creamer and sugar to the tray. When Tyler came down, he barely looked at it. "Could you not use the dark roast?" he said, frowning. "It gives me heartburn." I apologized. I offered to brew a new pot. He didn't answer. By the end of the first week, little rules started piling up. Don't leave shoes in the hallway. Don't do laundry past 8 p.m. Don't cook anything with garlic because the smell lingers. I cooked anyway, quietly, carefully, left meals in the fridge, tried to help without being in the way. I wanted them to see me as useful, not a burden. But Tyler didn't see effort. He saw intrusion. One afternoon, I folded the laundry Sophie left in the dryer, just trying to help. She didn't say thank you. She texted me from the upstairs bathroom. "Please don't touch our stuff without asking." I stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't until week 3 that I heard the word mouth. I was coming up the stairs when I heard Tyler in the kitchen. His voice was low, sharp. "She eats like we're feeding a third kid." He snapped. "I'm serious, Sophie. This was supposed to be short term." Then silence. Not even footsteps, just the sound of my own heart thudding in my ears. I turned around, went back downstairs, closed the door gently behind me. I didn't bring it up. I didn't confront her. I just folded my hands in my lap that night and tried not to cry loud enough for anyone to hear. I told myself she'd come around. But every day that passed, I became more and more invisible. I could walk through the living room, and neither of them would look up. At dinner, they'd talk over me, plans for the weekend, work drama, friends I'd never met. My name was never part of the conversation. And when I spoke, when I tried to add a story, a memory, even a compliment, Tyler would check his watch. Sophie would fake a smile. Eventually, I stopped trying. I started going for long walks just to stay out of the house. I wandered the local library, flipped through cookbooks I didn't have a kitchen to use. I sat on park benches feeding birds, watching strangers who didn't know me but also didn't ignore me. One afternoon, I came home early and overheard them arguing. I stood on the stairs again, frozen like a statue. "She's still here. Tyler," Sophie hissed. "What do you want me to do? Kick her out in the snow?" "She's not your responsibility," he snapped. "She's not even—" He stopped himself. But the silence that followed sliced deeper than any insult. That night, I didn't sleep. I packed a small duffel with essentials and left it by the door, just in case. 2 days later, Tyler made it official. We were eating dinner. I had made shepherd's pie his favorite. Ironically, Sophie was on her phone. Tyler finished his plate, pushed it away, and said, "Elaine, have you thought about other housing options?" I blinked. He said it like he was asking about the weather. Casual, calculated. Sophie kept looking at her phone. "I'm sorry I asked." He leaned back, arms crossed. This arrangement, it's not sustainable. We've got bills. Space is tight. You're not contributing." There it was. Sophie finally looked up. Her eyes met mine, and then she looked away. "I think maybe it's time," she said softly, "just so you can have your own space." That was the moment I stopped trying to understand. I stood up, walked to the basement, packed my things. No one followed. No one asked if I had somewhere to go. As I zipped up the second suitcase, I looked around the room that was never really mine. The guest towels I had folded, the book I had left half-read, the framed photo of Sophie as a child, still sitting on the side table. I didn't cry. Not then. But later, when I was standing on the curb with snowflakes catching in my eyelashes, I looked up at the light still on in their living room, and I let the tears fall. Not because I was homeless, but because I had finally accepted something I never wanted to believe. Love doesn't always survive convenience. And sometimes, the people you'd sacrifice everything for will happily watch you disappear. The motel I checked into that night was the kind of place you don't photograph. It smelled like damp carpet and stale cigarettes. The heater made a wheezing sound, like it was tired of being alive. And the wallpaper peeled at the corners, curling like it wanted to leave too. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, coat still on, suitcase unopened, just sitting. I kept waiting for the phone to buzz, for Sophie to call, for her to realize what had just happened, to ask where I was, if I was okay. It never rang. That silence, it wasn't quiet, it was deafening. The next morning, I went out and bought a prepaid flip phone. Something cheap, something simple. I sent Sophie a message. I'm okay, I understand. I love you always. No reply. 3 days later, I sent another. Just checking in. Hope you're doing all right. Again, nothing. I told myself she was busy, that maybe Tyler had convinced her to keep her distance, that it wasn't her fault. But deep down, something darker was settling inside me, a bitter root that curled around the soft parts of my heart and whispered, "She doesn't want you back." I tried to move forward. I applied for jobs at diners, retail stores, even a call center that advertised no experience needed. But no one wanted to hire a widow in her 60s with a 20-year employment gap and a hesitant smile. They didn't say it outright, of course. They used words like overqualified or will be in touch. They never were. My savings were thinning fast. I skipped lunches, bought the cheapest canned soups and microwavable rice. When I ran out of quarters for the vending machine downstairs, I started drinking hot water with sugar just to trick my stomach into feeling full. I didn't tell anyone, because there was no one to tell. At night, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, same as before, only now. The ceiling tiles weren't familiar. They didn't hold memories of Sophie's childhood drawings or the crack that used to leak when it rained. They were just squares, blank and silent. And yet, somehow, I still thought about them. Sophie and Tyler. I wondered if they noticed the quiet after I left, if they felt the missing presence of the woman who once folded their laundry and stocked their fridge. Or if they simply enjoyed the extra space. Sometimes I imagined Tyler walking past the apartment door and pausing, just for a second, not out of guilt, just habit, but that was a fantasy. More often, I imagined Sophie walking through the grocery store, pausing in front of the rotisserie chickens I used to buy for dinner. I wondered if she ever reached for one, then pulled her hand back without knowing why. I wondered if she missed me in moments so small, they didn't even register as missing. One night, desperate for something familiar, I pulled out the only non-essential item I had packed, a small box of keepsakes, just a few things I had grabbed in a rush. A photo of Sophie at age 6, wearing a fairy costume, a postcard from my sister years ago, and at the very bottom, a letter, yellowed, folded. I didn't recognize it at first. When I opened it, my hands began to tremble. It wasn't a letter. It was a court document. An adoption certificate. Sophie's adoption certificate. My mind froze. I read it again and again. There it was, in black and white, my name as legal guardian. My sister's name, Mara, as the biological mother. The date matched the year Mara died in that house fire. A fire Sophie had survived. A fire no one ever spoke about again. Suddenly, everything inside me twisted. I wasn't Sophie's mother. Not by blood. I was her aunt, the one who stepped in when no one else would. But I raised her. I loved her. I gave her everything. And now Now she wouldn't even answer a text. The betrayal settled differently now. Not like fire, not like rage, but like cold, wet earth pressing down on my chest. Had she known? Had someone told her? Was that why she looked through me instead of at me? The next morning, I called the only person I could think of, an old friend of Mara's, a woman named Darlene, who used to send Christmas cards with glitter that never stayed on the envelope. She picked up on the second ring. "Elaine Lord, I haven't heard your voice in forever." I asked one question. Did Sophie ever know she wasn't mine? There was a pause, a long one. Then Darlene exhaled. "I always wondered when you'd ask that." I sat down slowly. She found a photo. Darlene said softly, "Years ago, you, Mara, and her as a baby. You told her it was just the three of you on vacation. Remember, but..." She found a note written on the back. I swallowed hard. "She never said anything," I whispered. "She didn't want to hurt you, but I think it did something to her. Made her feel like her whole life was a secret, like maybe she never really belonged anywhere." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. After we hung up, I stared at the document in my lap, not because it changed how I felt about Sophie, but because I finally understood why the distance had grown so wide, why her silence had felt so rehearsed. She wasn't just hurt. She was lost. And she had left me behind before she even realized it. But something else was rising inside me now. Not guilt, not shame. Purpose. Because if Sophie was lost, maybe I needed to stop waiting for her to come find me. Maybe it was time I started building a world where I didn't have to beg for a seat at the table. One where she'd have to knock if she ever wanted to come back in. It wasn't a fight. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no dramatic exits. It was quiet, so quiet it almost didn't feel real. That's the thing about real heartbreak. It doesn't always come screaming. Sometimes it walks in wearing polite smiles and leaves you standing in the cold before you even realize you've been pushed out. It had snowed all morning. Thick, heavy flakes that settled like silence. I was making dinner: roasted butternut squash soup, grilled cheese on sourdough. Tyler's favorite, though I'd never heard him say thank you. Sophie was upstairs working late, or maybe just hiding. I didn't know anymore. I'd cleaned the kitchen, lit a candle that smelled like cinnamon, tried to pretend we were still a family, still connected. I even set the table with cloth napkins, like it might somehow bring us all a little closer. At 6:45, they both came downstairs. Tyler had that expression on his face, the one he wore when he was about to make something sound reasonable but cruel. Sophie didn't look at me. We sat, we ate. I told them the soup might be a little too spicy, and Tyler muttered, "Noted." Then silence. He took a long sip of water, set the glass down, and leaned back. "Well," he said, stretching the word like it deserved its own applause, "Sophie and I have been talking." My stomach dropped. Those 6 words never lead anywhere good. "We think it's time," he continued, "that you explore some options." I blinked. Options. "For housing," he clarified. "Long-term, more stable, somewhere that, better suits your needs." I looked at Sophie. Still nothing, her eyes fixed on her plate like she was counting breadcrumbs. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe it was happening like this, like a business transaction, like I was being offered a severance package and told to pack up my cubicle. "I see," I said softly, "and when were you planning on telling me?" Sophie finally looked up. Her face was pale, tired, like she hadn't slept in days. "I didn't want it to feel like this," she whispered. "But it does," I replied, "doesn't it?" Tyler stood up. "We just think it's best. For everyone." Everyone. As if I wasn't part of that group anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just nodded. Okay. I went downstairs, folded my clothes, zipped my suitcase slowly, like every tug of the zipper was a reminder, you are not wanted here anymore. There wasn't much to pack: 2 suitcases, a small box of keepsakes, the photo of Sophie in her fairy costume, a worn paperback I never finished. Tss. As I was leaving, I paused by the front door. Sophie stood in the hallway, arms crossed over her chest, not out of anger, just protection. I hope you understand, she said. I do, I replied, more than you know. Tyler didn't come out. I guess he thought he'd done enough. Outside, the snow was still falling, soft, steady, like the sky was trying to muffle everything. I walked to the bus stop, dragging my suitcases behind me. The wheels stuck in the slush, my shoes soaked through before I reached the end of the block. I didn't look back, because if I had, I would have fallen apart. At the bus stop, I sat down hard, the metal bench freezing through my coat. A gust of wind sent my scarf flying into the street. I didn't chase it. I just sat there. For minutes, maybe hours. I don't remember. Eventually, the bus came. I got on without a word. The driver didn't ask questions, just nodded at the weather, like it was the only enemy we had in common. I got off at the motel, the same one I would call home for the next few weeks. Same peeling wallpaper, same broken heater, same humming vending machine. And yet, something had shifted. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was clarity. That night, as I sat on the edge of the bed, holding a styrofoam cup of microwaved soup, I realized something that stopped me cold. They hadn't kicked me out because I was too loud or too messy or too needy. They had kicked me out because I reminded them of who they were, of the choices they made, of the truths they didn't want to face. And in their world, silence was easier than honesty. Discomfort was easier than confrontation. They didn't want to deal with the reality of the woman who raised Sophie, because Sophie had been pretending I didn't matter for a long, long time. And now she didn't have to pretend anymore. She just had to look the other way. The next morning, I opened the closet in the motel room, looking for a sweater, and saw the small box of keepsakes I had stuffed in last minute. I pulled it out, sat on the floor, dug through old letters, photos. Then my fingers touched something familiar. A small leather-bound notebook. The spine cracked when I opened it. It wasn't mine. It was Mara's. My sister. Sophie's real mother. The diary I didn't even remember taking. I stared at the first page. Her handwriting was still the same, small, neat, written in ink that bled just a little with time. I started to read. And with each word, the ground beneath my grief began to shake. This wasn't just a story of being left behind. This was a story of secrets, of buried truths, of power I never knew I had. And for the first time since I left that house, I didn't feel helpless. I felt ready. Because they thought they had erased me. But they had no idea what was about to surface from the snow. I didn't open it all at once. The notebook. The diary. The ghost of Mara. I turned the pages like they might burn me, like each entry held a memory too fragile to touch or too sharp to hold. The early pages were harmless updates about groceries, cold weather complaints, half-finished thoughts about work. But as I flipped further, the handwriting grew more hurried, more frantic, the ink smeared in places, like it had been written through tears. And then I saw it. A name. Not in full, just initials are at. The date, September 16th. Mara wrote, "He came again today. Said he wished things were different. Said he wishes he could take Sophie and just disappear. But he has a family, a reputation. He said I had to keep quiet, that it's better this way. I told him I didn't care about the money. He insisted. He said he's making arrangements. I don't know what to believe anymore. But I read that entry 5 times. Then I kept reading, entry after entry, each one stitching together a picture I had never dared to imagine. R.T. was someone important, wealthy, connected, married. Someone who had loved my sister in the shadows and abandoned her when it mattered most. But he hadn't just left her behind. He had promised her something. Protection. A trust. A future for Sophie. And I had never known. Or maybe I hadn't wanted to know. When Mara died in that fire, I didn't ask questions. I was too busy surviving, grieving, trying to make sense of how my big sister could vanish in a matter of minutes and leave behind a baby who wouldn't stop crying. Sophie had been only 18 months old. The fire was ruled accidental, faulty wiring. They said, no foul play, no deeper story. But as I kept reading Mara's words, something settled deep in my stomach, a knowing, a terrible, impossible knowing. She had been scared. Scared of what would happen if the truth got out. Scared of what R.T. would do if she exposed him. Scared that Sophie would grow up to hate her for the secrets she had to keep. My hands were shaking when I reached the final entry. It was dated 3 days before the fire. He said it's done, that I'll get something in writing from his attorney soon. He didn't say when, just that if anything happens, I should contact a man named Everett Kane. He works at Belling and Rose. He knows what to do. I don't know if I believe him, but I have to try. For Sophie, I just want her safe. Everett Kane. Belling and Rose. The names meant nothing at first, but the next morning, I took the bus into town, found the public library, and used one of their old desktop computers, the kind with sticky keyboards and monitors that hum like they're struggling to breathe. I typed in the law firm's name. It still existed. Small, private, based out of Allentown. Everett Kane was retired, but his name was still listed under of counsel. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter. A real letter, ink on paper, my hands cramped halfway through. But I kept going. I explained who I was, who Mara was, what I had found. I didn't ask for money or favors. I asked for clarity. I mailed it that same day. Then I waited. And waited. Days passed. Then a week. Then, one morning, just as I was beginning to convince myself it had all been for nothing, my motel phone rang. A voice on the other end, Mrs. Hartwell, this is Everett Kane. I believe we need to talk. I froze. He sounded old, but sharp, like a blade kept in a drawer but never dulled. He told me he remembered Mara, that she had come to him once nervous, hopeful, carrying Sophie in one arm and a file folder in the other. She never returned. But her instructions were clear. He said, in the event of her death, I was to hold on to a sealed letter. I never mailed it. I didn't know where you went, but I kept it, just in case. I asked him why. Because some debts aren't legal. He said, they're human. He invited me to his home, said he didn't trust email, that this needed to be handled in person. I took the earliest Greyhound I could. Allentown was colder than I remembered, grayer. But when I walked into his townhouse, a warm, cluttered place with books piled high and pictures of people I'd never meet, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Safe. He handed me a letter in a manila envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable, Mara's. Inside a second envelope, this one addressed not to me, but to Sophie Delilah Hartwell's. It wasn't long, barely a page, but every word etched itself into my heart. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you. You were born from something complicated, but you were never a mistake. You were my miracle. And if Elaine is with you now, then you are safe. She is the strongest person I know, stronger than me. Trust her, always. I cried reading it. Not because it changed everything, but because it confirmed what I'd always known. I was never her second choice. I was always the plan. And now, finally, I had something more than grief. I had proof, not just of love, but of inheritance. And with that proof came something I never asked for, but now knew I needed. Power. I didn't take the bus back to the motel. After I left Mr. Kane's house, I walked, slowly, one foot in front of the other, my bag heavy with papers, my mind heavier with everything I'd just learned. I had come looking for clarity. Instead, I left with evidence of a life I didn't know I'd inherited. Mr. Kane gave me more than the letter. He gave me a folder thick, slightly frayed, filled with documents, records, transfer slips, a modest trust account that had been quietly accruing interest for over 20 years. It wasn't millions, but it was enough. Enough to change everything. The next morning, I didn't go back to the motel room right away. I sat in a coffee shop with peeling linoleum floors and a broken espresso machine, ordered black coffee and a plain bagel, ate slowly, like I was trying to prove to myself that I wasn't in a rush anymore. I wasn't the woman begging for a couch. I wasn't the woman watching snowflakes fall from a cold bench. I was someone else now. Not because of the money, because of what it represented. Mara hadn't just trusted me with Sophie. She'd trusted me with a legacy. And now that I had the truth in my hands, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months. Anger. Not the fiery, reckless kind, but the slow-burning, cold-to-the-touch kind. The kind that doesn't yell, the kind that waits. It was time I stopped surviving. Time I started building. I spent the next week back at the motel in silence. No texts, no calls, just research. I watched videos on real estate investing. I read articles about property laws. I taught myself how LLCs worked, what shell companies were, how anonymous ownership could be structured to avoid direct attention. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning protection. Because if there was one thing I had learned, it was this: when people think you're powerless, they stop hiding how they truly feel. And Tyler had made one thing very clear. He saw me as a mouth to feed. So I was going to own the kitchen. It started with a listing. A late-night search on a regional auction site brought it to my screen, a small, aging apartment building in a suburb just outside where Sophie and Tyler lived. I clicked on it by instinct. The photos were grainy. The building was old but structurally fine. Brick exterior, 4 units. And there it was. Unit 3B. Their unit. The very same building they had been renting for the past 2 years. I stared at the listing for a long time. The owner was behind on property taxes. The auction was scheduled for 2 weeks from that Friday. The price was surprisingly within reach, especially with the trust Mara had left me. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a landlord. I wasn't even sure I wanted to be near them again. But then I remembered the night they asked me to leave. The way Sophie didn't speak. The way Tyler smiled like he'd finally taken out the trash. And something inside me shifted. This wasn't about getting even. This was about reclaiming space. About standing somewhere I had once been erased and deciding I belonged there now, on my own terms. I called Mr. Kane. Told him everything. He didn't ask why. Just said, let's make it clean, no direct trace. We'll build a holding company. And so we did. Within 10 days, I had formed Harwell & County, a silent LLC registered through a privacy trust. On paper, it looked like any other investment vehicle. But I knew what it really was. It was mine. The auction came and went quietly. No one else bid. And just like that, I owned the building. The very roof that had once watched me leave in silence was now under my name. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Mr. Kane knew about Sophie and Tyler's connection to the place. That night, I printed the deed and placed it in a simple black folder. I didn't frame it. I didn't celebrate. I just sat with it. Let the moment breathe. It felt less like revenge and more like a correction. A balancing. Weeks passed. The property management company sent out the standard notices, lease updates, inspections, rent adjustments. Nothing personal, nothing targeted. But I made one exception. For Unit 3, their rent tripled. Not doubled. Tripled. Market rate, plus fees, plus penalties for late payment. I expected Tyler to explode. He didn't disappoint. 2 days later, the property office forwarded an email. The subject line, "What is this?" The body of furious rant. He accused the company of extortion, demanded to know who the new owner was, threatened legal action. I read it once, then forwarded it to the manager with a note, "Please respond using standard clause C, no special exceptions." I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. I wasn't interested in a confrontation. I wanted silence, the kind that lingers after everything collapses. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. From Sophie. "Mom, I don't know if you heard, but our rent just shot up, like, a lot. Tyler's losing his mind. I don't know. Can we talk?" I didn't reply. Not yet. Let the silence work. Let the cracks spread. I watched them from afar, quietly, cautiously. And for the first time since they asked me to leave, I didn't feel small. I felt steady. Because now, I wasn't living at their mercy. I was living in the shadow of their choices. And they were living under my roof. I didn't go back to that neighborhood right away. For a while, it was enough just to know, to sit with the knowledge that I owned the very place where I'd been erased, that the space which once pushed me out now belonged to me down to the hinges on the door and the locks on the windows. That was enough. At least for a while. But grief has a strange way of turning into motion. I didn't want revenge. I wanted security. And so I began to build. From the outside, it probably looked like any other renovation project. Small upgrades, slow improvements, itemized changes that didn't draw attention. But each decision I made, every repair approved, was intentional. The hallway lights had flickered for years. I replaced them with soft, motion sensor LEDs. The cracked lobby tiles were torn out and replaced with quiet laminate that absorbed footsteps. I had a security camera installed near the front door, not because I expected trouble, but because I finally could. And all of it, under the name Harwell & Co. No one knew who owned it. Not the tenants. Not Tyler. Not even Sophie, at least, not yet. I started attending local landlord meetings under a different name, wore my hair differently, bought new glasses, polished clothes, nothing extravagant, just enough to become unrecognizable, forgettable in the safest way possible. And in that forgettability, I built power. Real power doesn't come with shouting. It comes with silence that makes people wonder who's watching. The first official inspection notice went out a month after the lease changes. Routine, professional. Tyler lost it. He stormed into the property office with printed emails and an ego too big for the front desk. The manager, bless her patience, followed every protocol, offered no answers, no names, just policy. He sent follow-up messages, empty threats wrapped in indignation. Sophie called again. Voicemail. "Mom, I know you're not picking up, but things are getting tense. Tyler's. He's stressed. We're trying to figure it out. I don't know who else to talk to. Bitch." I didn't call back. Not because I didn't care, but because I needed her to feel the absence she created. Every day she had stood next to him in silence was a day she had chosen comfort over courage. Now she was tasting what silence felt like on the other side. I watched from my apartment 3 blocks away, second story, view of the park. Not far, but far enough. I had moved in quietly, under another LLC, a building I didn't own, just rented, simple, safe, mine. From my living room, I could see the courtyard of the old building on clear afternoons. I didn't spy. I just checked, once or twice a week. Sophie looked different now. Tired. Shoulders hunched, hair thrown up in that messy way she used to wear when she had a cold. There were days I saw her come and go alone, carrying plastic bags filled with generic groceries. The kind I used to buy when money was tight. The kind I knew she never touched when I was around because they weren't organic or fresh. Tyler, meanwhile, was unraveling. The property manager told me he had started harassing the maintenance crew, complaining about everything from water pressure to hallway smells. His pride was bruised. He was flailing. I let it unfold, not out of cruelty, but because I needed the silence to stretch long enough for truth to echo. I spent my nights reading Mara's diary again, slowly this time, letting her voice fill the room, letting the past settle into the walls like paint drying after years of neglect. It reminded me where I came from, who I was before they made me feel disposable, and it gave me strength, enough to keep waiting. Then, one afternoon, I crossed paths with them. By accident. I had stopped at a small cafe on the corner for tea. It was warm, quiet. I was seated near the window when I saw them, Tyler, walking a step ahead of Sophie, face twisted in irritation. She was trailing behind, holding a grocery bag like it was the only thing grounding her. They didn't see me, but I saw everything. The way his hand flew up when she spoke. The way she shrank just a little. The way she looked over her shoulder, as if she knew something or someone was missing. And that's when I realized, maybe she did know. Maybe she'd figured it out. Because people don't look over their shoulder unless they're searching for something that once made them feel safe. That night, I received another voicemail. Different this time. Quieter. "Mom, I think I made a mistake." That was all she said. 6 words. A whisper of a bridge. I didn't return the call. Instead, I authorized new mailboxes for the building. Had the lawn reseeded. Approved new lighting in the laundry room. The building looked better than it ever had. The tenants, except one, were happy. And slowly, month by month, Sophie's calls stopped being about rent. They became about regret. "Can we talk? I just want to see you. I miss you." But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Because silence isn't just the absence of noise. Sometimes it's a boundary. Sometimes it's a mirror. And I needed her to stand in front of it long enough to see who she'd become. Only then could we begin to speak. Only then could she start to remember who I'd always been. It was a Wednesday when the knock came. Late afternoon, sky overcast, the kind of gray light that softens everything but doesn't hide a thing. I was folding laundry, listening to the low hum of the heater, thinking about nothing, really, just letting the day pass quietly, like so many had since I bought that building. Then 3 soft knocks on the door. Not urgent, not angry, just hesitant. Like someone asking permission to remember who they used to be. I knew before I looked. I knew it was Sophie. Still, I hesitated before opening the door. When I did, she stood there looking smaller than I remembered, like someone who had been carrying too many invisible bags and finally dropped one on the way over. Her coat was open, but she didn't seem cold. Her hands were empty, but her eyes carried something heavy. "Hi, Mom," she said. It was the first time I'd heard her voice in person in months. And she called me Mom. Not Elaine. Not hey. Not silence. Just Mom. I stepped aside. She entered slowly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. She looked around the apartment, the tidy kitchen, the neat stack of books on the coffee table, the single orchid blooming in the corner by the window. "This is nice," she whispered. "Peaceful." I poured 2 cups of tea without asking. Same way I used to when she came home crying from school and didn't want to talk about it. We sat across from each other. She stared at her mug for a long time. Then, quietly, she said, "He's gone." I didn't move. "Tyler." She nodded. "Left last week. No fight. Just a note." "What did it say?" Her lips twisted. Something about not being able to breathe. That I'd ruined everything. That he was done. She took a sip of tea. "I think," she said slowly, "he figured it out." "Figured what out?" She looked up at me. Her eyes didn't flinch. "That it was you." I didn't answer. Didn't confirm. Didn't deny. She didn't need me to. "I saw the documents," she continued. "The inspection schedules. The LLC names. Harwell and Cote. I looked it up." A pause. Then I remembered something. "A book from your room. A notebook. I must have taken it by accident the last time I visited you. I found it in a box under my bed." She pulled it from her bag. "Mara's diary." The leather cracked, the corners worn, the bookmark still tucked near the back. "I read it," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I saw my name, and I couldn't stop." Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. "I didn't know she was my mom," she said. "Not really. I always thought that fire just happened, that you took care of me because you had to, not because you wanted to." I leaned back. Let the silence hold us both. She reached for the diary and placed it gently on the table between us. "I didn't realize what you gave up," she said, "what you sacrificed, how much you protected me, even from the truth." She took a shaky breath. "I've been angry for so long, and I didn't even know why." I nodded slowly. "I know," I said. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I left him." It hit the air like a thunderclap. "He tried to go through my phone again," she said, "told me he thought I was hiding something, accused me of being part of a conspiracy to ruin his life." Her voice cracked. "I told him I wasn't hiding anything, but I was. I was hiding you." A long silence passed. Then, softly, she added, "I changed the locks again." I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't the same girl who'd watched me leave from behind a bowl of soup. This was a woman who had walked through fire and finally stepped out the other side. "I don't know who I am without him," she admitted, "but I'd rather find out than keep disappearing." I nodded. Then stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the bare trees lining the street. "You didn't become her all at once," I said quietly. Sophie looked confused. "The woman who let him throw me out." I clarified. "You didn't become her in one day. It was small things, letting him talk for you, choosing quiet over truth, thinking peace meant obedience." She didn't argue, didn't defend, just listened. And when she spoke again, her voice broke. "I'm sorry." I turned to face her. "For all of it," she said, "for standing beside him, for not speaking up, for looking away." She looked down, like the guilt physically weighed her. "I know I can't fix it, but I want to try." I sat beside her, held her hand. "You see me now," I said. She looked up. "That changes everything." We sat like that for a long time. Two women, one story, finally told. Before she left, she paused at the door. "You didn't raise me to be weak," she said. I smiled softly. No, I replied. You just stopped looking. And as the door closed behind her, I felt something shift, not forgiveness, not yet, but the quiet beginning of something that might grow into it. Because sometimes, when the truth speaks, the echo carries further than blood. I didn't do any of this to be thanked. Not by Sophie, not by Tyler, not by anyone. I didn't want applause, or closure, or even an apology wrapped in tears and tea. What I wanted, what I needed was something no one could hand me. I needed to remember that I was never small, that their silence wasn't proof I was unworthy, that their dismissal didn't define me. I had lived too long in rooms where I had to whisper to be allowed to stay, in houses where I traded dignity for space, in conversations where I was only heard when it was convenient. And now I lived in a quiet little home, with hardwood floors and soft light in the mornings, the kind of quiet I chose, not the kind that was forced on me. Sophie visits sometimes, not often, not perfectly, but when she comes, she brings small things, flowers from the corner stand, books I might like, a photo of her from when she was little, finally framed. She still carries guilt. I can see it in the way she makes tea, like it's a ritual of repentance. But I don't hold it against her, because healing isn't about punishing others. It's about choosing not to punish yourself for surviving. And I survived. I survived the cold, the silence, the heartbreak. And in doing so, I became something no one saw coming. Free. Not rich. Not powerful in the traditional sense. Just free. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous thing you can be to people who once tried to control you. If you're still listening, thank you. Maybe you've been through something like this. Maybe you felt like a burden, an afterthought, an extra mouth. If so, I want you to know, you are none of those things. You are not invisible. You are not disposable. You are not too much. You're just enough for the life that's waiting to meet you when you stop settling for less. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. And if you've ever experienced something similar, feeling unwanted, erased, or quietly betrayed, I invite you to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters more than you know.